Welcome back to another video. Hope you're all having a great day. And with no further ado, let's get into the week 17 recap, which is crazy. One more week before the playoffs, and still very much a lot to determine. Starting off with the Christmas Day game, starting with the first one, Cowboys at the Commanders. And I mean, if you're Dallas, you just got to be thinking, what if? Because this offense with a 4,000 yard passer who might even end up leading the league when it's all said and done, passing yards, two 1,000 yard receivers, 1,000 yard back, and yet because of this defense, this team is not going to make the playoffs. But hey, look, a good win to over a division rival, that's never a bad thing. They can finish out finishing 500 next week if they beat the Giants, and you just gotta hope in the off season this team makes huge pushes to help this defense out. Most likely, hopefully, firing Matt Eberflus and bringing in guys. Sorry about that. Bringing in guys to help this team out because if you keep this offense together and then you have a better defense, this team is competing for the playoffs. For Washington, it's just been a sad year. You know, injuries have really plagued this team, but hey, you like young guys like Krosky Merritt, Jerzon Newton, making these big time plays, um, and really affecting hopefully the future of this team. And you just want to finish out the year strong and hope that hopefully next year the injury bug isn't that bad and you really can be back to being contending in the NFC. Went on to the Lions at the Vikings, the second game. And hey, if Minnesota had better QB play this year, they'd be in the playoffs because they have won four straight since losing um losing badly to the Seattle Seahawks. And I mean, they just looked like a better team. Um, and you just got to think, what if they had better QB play? What if they kept Sam Darnold, kept Daniel Jones, brought in somebody else? Because this team's defense is one of the best. And if Brian Flores is still there next year, which it's up for a doubt because teams probably will be looking for him to be the head coach or maybe the DC. So, but if this team brings in competent QB play, whether McCarthy, more healthier next year is better, or whether it's bringing somebody else, this team is a playoff contender. And it's just crazy to say, kind of like the Cowboys. It's like, well, the opposite, but like, it's just they were one piece missing from being a good team. For the Lions, I mean, I don't want to say their window is closed because this team is still really talented, but I do think big changes need to happen. Now, I don't want to say it's all Jared Goff's fault, but his immobility is, I feel like, starting to become more of a factor as he gets up there in age and as this team starts to get better. And it's like, against this Vikings defense, other QBs, would be able to escape and make those plays. Goff can't really do that. And while it's not all his fault, I do kind of feel like the Lions need to at least think to themselves, is Jared Goff the guy who can get this team back to, the NFC Championship game, trying to make the Super Bowl? Or is he holding this team back to its fuller potential? And then the final Christmas Day game, Broncos at the Chiefs. And just like every Broncos game, it was close and they found a way to win. This team won the AFC West, so for the first time since 2015 when Denver won it and won the Super Bowl, the Chiefs are not the AFC West champions. Um, and I mean, it's been a good year for this team. They are a Super Bowl contender on defense. I do think this offense does has limitations, and when they play a really good team, I think they could run into some problems. Because we saw the Chiefs last year; they were close in so many games, and they just, were able to win those games. And then when the playoffs came, they got destroyed by a great Eagles team. Now, there's not any great teams like the Eagles were last year, but I do feel like if they do play a team and that team is able to shut down this offense, it might be a little bit harder to win these games for the Chiefs. When they play competitive after a really bad game against the Titans last week, it was good to see them play well and keep this one competitive. And you're just moving on to 2026. Andy Reid seems to be staying in, but I think big changes need to come in on this coaching staff on the offensive side, and they need to, bring in difference makers on both sides of the ball. Because if Mahomes is out at least the beginning of the season, this team needs to be able to play well enough to where they can win games without Mahomes, or else this team is going to be starting off pretty bad next year. Moving on to the Saturday games, Texans at the Chargers. I mean, this game looked like it was going to be a blowout. I mean, back to back Houston touchdowns, you know, to the rookies, Higgins and Null, 14-0. It felt like Houston was going to run away with this, but Chargers kept it close. It is funny that Cameron Dicker, who was said to be the most accurate kicker of NFL history, misses a field goal and an extra point. 4 points, which they lost by. Um, Crazy. Houston, I mean, this team's won 8 straight, and they just look like a completely different team since from that team early in the season. I mean, the offense has its flaws, but has looked better. Defense, obviously, we knew was one of the better, if not the best in the league. And this team, most likely going to be the 5 seed, has a really, clear path to making it. And for a Texans team that once upon a time people were saying, CJ Stroud, the guy, is this team going to miss the playoffs? No, they're going to make the playoffs. So shout out to D'Amico Ryans and this team for continuing to fight despite the hard start, despite the offensive woes. For the Chargers, I mean, this team is the 6th seed right now because the Bills lost, but this team just is unserious. I mean, this offense, I mean, I know they're banged up on the O line, and it's kind of hard to win games, especially against really good pass rush. But this Chargers team it's another year where it's like last year they entered the playoffs. I feel like on a high note. This year it feels like they're ending on a low note. They right now they're scheduled to play the Jags, so that'll be interesting to see those teams play again. But this is a Chargers team that really needs to invest into this offensive line with backups because if they had better O line play, more so on the tackles, um, and some of the interior, I feel like this offense would be playing so much better, especially with how talented of a group they have. Moving on to the second Saturday game, Ravens at Packers. And look, who knew giving Derrick Henry the ball would be a recipe for success? I mean, 4 touchdowns, over 250 yards, I think. He was dominant. Snoop Huntley made excellent plays, and this defense played pretty well. And the Ravens won. They got help from the Steelers, I mean, from the Browns, for beating Pittsburgh, setting up a huge Sunday night football winning in game. And look, this Ravens team, if they make the playoffs, I don't think they're going to go far. even if they won the North, they more than likely are going to take on the Texans, and Houston destroyed this team. I know they were banged up earlier this year, but I do feel like even if this team somehow makes it to the playoffs by winning the North, I do still feel like big changes need to happen for this team. And I just want to talk about these Lamar Jackson rumors, which none of them are true, okay? Everybody is going out acting like Lamar needs to be moved on from. The Ravens need to find a new QB, but it's like Lamar's the franchise guy. Like, I don't see anybody saying anything about Joe Burrow, who's had the same amount of injury play seasons and has played two less years. So, to anybody out there who is misleading people by saying the Ravens should move on from Lamar and that he just is not that guy anymore, he is. Okay, he's been banged up all year. Let's not forget, at the beginning of the year before these injuries, he was on pace to have a better season than he did last year. And I think he was like the first quarterback to have a certain stat line through the first three games and not be undefeated. So it's crazy that people are spreading misinformation about Lamar and the Ravens and but moving on to the Packers, I mean, this is another year where Green Bay stumbles to the finish line. You know, last year the excuse was, oh, they're the top two teams in their division were just better. But this year, they were in first place at one point, had a shot to be the number one seed, and couldn't. They're now 9-6-1, going to be the seventh seed. Either play the Eagles or Bears in the first round. And then I'm sorry, this Packers team once again just falls apart late in the year. And I think people need to start saying, hey, does this team maybe need to move on from certain guys, whether that's coaching wise, executive wise, player wise? Because this team has the talent, but I just don't know if they have the right people in charge to really execute this team in a year where anybody seems to be able to win. The Packers seem to fall apart when the end of the year comes around. Moving on to the Sunday slate, starting with the Seahawks at the Panthers. And it was close early. I mean, Seattle could not do much on offense. It felt like, maybe this team was, probably going to fall into one of those trap games where it's like they were looking ahead to the next point. But no, the defense makes plays, the offense ends up capitalizing, and 13-3, a win gets them the top seed, and everybody's coming through Lumen Field. So give credit to the Hawks for hanging tough against a Panthers team that was playing them decently before just a couple mistakes. For the Panthers, I mean, they still can win the division. And there's actually, even if they lose to the Bucks, if Atlanta beats the Saints, then Carolina would secure the South despite Tampa winning. So they actually have two paths to get to the NFC South title. But this team is just so confusing. Like some weeks they seem they can beat anybody, other weeks they seem to lose to anybody. And I just really hope that next year this Panthers team is more consistent, because you're looking at a Jags team who was kind of like the Panthers, where it's like they'd win against some teams, lose against the worst teams, but they finally found their form. I'm hoping the Panthers can do that, because if this team can find their way to being consistent more often with wide open NFC South, that seems like it's every year wide open, the Panthers could be that next team to truly control it for the next couple of years. Moving on to the Cardinals at the Bengals. Yeah, another year where the Bengals are going to finish out strong and keep everybody. I mean, it's just crazy that this team doesn't play, great through like the most of the season, and then strings together wins at the end of the year where it's like, hey, they can, finish with, you know, not an outside the top 10 pick. And it's like, hey, the Bengals, you know, gonna keep everybody. I just think it's crazy that this team, like last year, they were 4-8. Felt like this team was a disaster. They won their final 5 games to barely miss out on the playoffs this year. You know, 3-8 at one point. They're probably going to finish 7-10 when they play the Browns next week, which isn't an easy game because it's a division game. But um, they could win 4 of their final 6 games, and for what? I mean, what really is like? You just always see this with teams that like they aren't playing well through like most of the season, and then they just start rattling off wins down the stretch, and then they you know, end up missing out on a top pick because they won too many games. Arizona, I mean, big changes are going to be needed. This team has now lost 13 of 14 games since starting 2-0. And it just goes to show you that this team just is not serious, and big changes are going to be happening for a Cardinals team that is going to enter into another rebuild, which is crazy because, like, it felt like when Jonathan Gannon and Monty Ossenfort were brought in, it felt like this team was finally going to be in the right direction, but it turns out they just weren't the right guys. At least Gannon wasn't the right guy to lead this team. Went on to an AFC North clash, Steelers at Browns, and look, Cleveland did what they had to do. They played good defense. The offense did just enough, and they won this game. Myles Garrett did not break the sack record, and it kind of felt like the Steelers were playing to stop Garrett and not really try to win the game. Like it felt like their game plan was Garrett cannot get the sack record even if we lose this game. And it just kind of feels on brand for the Steelers. And I know they had injuries on Watt, Calvin Austin, DK was suspended, but it's just classic Steelers where it's like they have a chance to lock up the division, a chance to rest their starters and begin to prepare for the playoffs. They lose, and now they have to win on Sunday just to make it. For Cleveland, I mean, look, I said it was a good job, and I mean, Shador looked decent, not the greatest. I don't think maybe they could consider keeping him for next year and maybe say, hey, let's see what we have because this QB class coming up isn't really the greatest, and maybe the Browns want to give Shador a full off season, a full season to really see what he has. Um, Moving on to an AFC South class, Jags at the Colts. I mean, Jacksonville, this just goes to show that any division, I mean, we saw that with the Browns, but it really says that any division game is not an easy game. Like, every division team plays up, for the most part, plays up to when they play division games because these two teams know each other a lot. They play each other every year, so they know these teams in and out. And Colts almost won this game, but Jacksonville held on. Lauren, T-Law didn't have the greatest performance of his career, but look, he played well enough. The defense made plays down the stretch, and they have a shot to win and with some help, potentially getting that number 1 seed. They'll at least be the South champions with a win or a Houston loss. And you got to credit to Liam Cohen, who maybe is proving that the Bucks probably should have kept him over Todd Bowles because he is really believing that the Jags, he's kind of unlocked this team and unlocked these guys to play better. And imagine what this team looks like with Travis Hunter, you know, full go next year. It'll be crazy. For the Colts, I do think Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen should be on the hot seat because this team went from 7-1 and the darlings of the NFL to missing the playoffs and most likely finishing with a losing record because of the Texans next week. And it just goes to show you that even if you're one of the best teams at one point. You can fall apart, and this team that you know, like everybody entering the year was like, this team is going to be on the hot seat, and then they started to win games, and it felt like they kind of cooled off, but they've lost now six consecutive games, or six consecutive, yeah, six consecutive games. Could make it seven next week, and it's just crazy that this team, which was the number one seed once upon a time, now is missing the playoffs. Which I think is the first time since like the '95 Raiders, which is crazy. But I do think Steichen and Ballard should at least be considered to be moved on from, because those guys, this was kind of like the final year to maybe keep their jobs. And I don't know if they get another season to really help this team out when they've kind of faltered at the end again. Moving on to Bucks at the Dolphins, battle for Florida. And I mean, Miami looked decent. I mean, Quinn Ewers made some plays. Yeah, he looks like he can be a future backup, spot starter when needed. This defense made plays. Um, and look, a lot of people, were probably saying this Dolphins team was, just beating up on bad competition. And then once they played good teams, or at least decent teams, they were going to finally lose. But a huge win. They have a potential shot to knock out New England next week of getting the one seed. And you hope, this team can build on something. Hopefully they can bring in the right quarterback, bring in a GM that can really build this team from the ground up, and hopefully have this team actually competing late into the year and in those cold games, and not, just being a fun team that when they play good teams they lose. For Tampa Bay, I mean, big changes are needed. That coaching staff needs to be fired, because this team, once upon a time, was 6-2 and were competing for the number one seed. They're now 7-9 and need to win and hope the Falcons lose just to win the NFC South. So it is just crazy that the Bucks went from having this huge lead and looking like a contender to falling apart at the end of the year. And I think big changes need. And I think last year with Liam Cohen, it kind of shows that sometimes great coordinators really are the reason those teams are good and not the head coach. And I think we're seeing it with Todd Bowles not being able to sustain that success year in and year out. And it's kind of had this team falter at the end. Maybe it's just a team that needs to bring in a fresh mind to really help this team out. Moving on to an AFC East class, Pats at the Jets. This was a dominating win. I mean, New England was up 42-3 at one point. It looked like it wasn't even going to be a contest. And it wasn't. I mean, Drake May put in his final shot to be the MVP. They will still play their starters next week, chance to get the top seed, but they win the AFC East for the first time since 2019. And I mean, you got to give credit to Mike Vrabel, got to give credit to this team. Just, after the slow start, they were able to rattle off wins and really show that they can be a for real contender come January. And this team has given the Bills a team to really um, be scared of now. For the Jets, I do think maybe Aaron Glenn should be considered to be fired, because, look, when your team plays competitive but they lose games, hey, it shows us this team still has fight. But when you get blown out at home against a division rival, it maybe says that this team needs a fresher mind. Now, I know it's only his first year, and I'm not a big guy on firing first year head coaches because I always feel like you should let them kind of build their own identity. But I do think maybe the Jets need to consider moving on from him because if this team wants to get back to being a contender, they're going to need a guy in charge who's actually going to make big time changes to this culture to really have them start to believe they can win these type of games. Moving on to Saints at the Titans. Battle of franchise QBs it felt. Tyler Shock gets the win, and he looked really good once again. The Saints teams won 4 straight, and they have potential to make it 5 straight if they beat the Falcons this Sunday. And I mean, you gotta give credit to Kellen Moore, Mickey Loomis for making the right decision. A lot of people didn't believe in Tyler Shock, including me. A lot of people were like, "Oh, this guy, older quarterback, injury plagued. Is he really going to work out?" And then when Spencer Rattler was named the starter, it felt like that team wasted a first round, second round pick on a guy who isn't even going to play for them. But he comes in and he's played pretty well and has earned the starting job for 2026. And I think maybe if this team builds up this roster, the Saints can be a contender and really show that in a wide open NFC South, maybe the Saints in a couple of years, when those young guys start to, become, closer to their top tier of their position, it can really show that this Saints team had a vision and they just needed the right guy in line to lead them. Tennessee, I mean, it looked good for a second consecutive week for this offense to play well. Chigakonko with that huge, crazy touchdown where he broke off Kool-Aid McKinstry. Look, Cam Ward looked good. This offense played well, and you just hope the right guy comes in to be that head coach. Because Tennessee has a good roster. I mean, it's not a great, but it's a good enough roster where it's like if you bring in the right head coach and the GM makes the right moves, this team can be competing next season, and it is crazy that the Titans, just last year, it was kind of like, oh, who's going to be the next quarterback? They found it in Cam Ward, and so did the Saints and Tyler Shaw. Moving on to the 4 o'clock slate, Giants at the Raiders. And look, the Giants, I know Giants fans are going to hate losing this game when they potentially get the number one pick, and everybody's going to be like, oh, they did the same thing last year. Well, the Colts were a better team last year than the Raiders are this year. So it's not the same. And also, the Giants team, a win like this can kind of carry momentum into the offseason. It's kind of like, um, it's kind of like if a team fires their head coach, but has young players on the roster who are playing well down the stretch, that a team can convince, that a coach can convince themselves, hey, I could be that guy to unlock this team's potential. Jackson Dart looked really good. The defense made plays. I know it was against the Raiders, who a lot of people believe are tanking, but a win is a win, and the Giants, can still get a really impactful player. And it's just this Giants team has a bright future on both offensive and defense. For the Raiders, I mean, look, you're gonna lose next week to the Chiefs. Finish 2-15, fire Pete Carroll, and hopefully bring in a coach that can actually have this team competing. Because the team kind of this past off season, they kind of just tried to skip the rebuilding phase and tried to just compete right away. And that just you can't do that in the NFL. You can't just go from bad to good by just bringing a bunch of veterans and hoping it'll work out. This team needs a fresh reset. They're hopefully going to get it with a new coach and QB, and this team hopefully can have some real things to build for because this team truly does have a lot of good things on the roster. They just need to have a coach really be able to capitalize on. Moving on to the Eagles at the Bills, and look, this was a game that most people will not want to watch. I mean, the Eagles offense looked horrible outside of a early drive for a Dallas Goedert touchdown. Jalen Hurts, I mean, I know he's won a lot of playoff games and won a Super Bowl, but there does need to be a conversation that this guy, you know, maybe only as good when his offensive coordinator is good. Because when Shane Steichen was there from 21 and 22, Hurts was looking pretty good, including 22 being the MVP runner-up. 2024 with Kellen Moore, he wins the Super Bowl. But 23 and 25, he just has not looked the greatest. And I think it goes to show you that Hurts kind of is dependent on the team around him. And I feel like not that the Eagles need to find a new quarterback, but I feel like maybe, you know, considering what they did, when they drafted Jalen Hurts in the second round, maybe they need to consider bringing in somebody else because maybe Hurts just is not the guy long term. Because while he's been good enough for this team to make Super Bowl runs, he's just not that great to really say, hey, he's the guy who can deliver us, multiple Super Bowls. And the Eagles kind of need to maybe realize Hurts is kind of dependent on good coordinators and not just being a very good player. For the Bills, I mean, this is why I'm scared to, believe this is the Bills' year and believe that this team can make it because, look, Philly's offense couldn't do anything for the most part in this game. Couldn't do anything in the second half. And Philly's defense really good, but Bills team just doesn't have much around Josh Allen. And look, I'm not the biggest Allen, you know, sort of he needs help because I feel like any QB, that is very good doesn't have a lot of help around them. But um I do feel like Josh Allen, I feel like also doesn't always make those great plays. And I feel like outside of last year, he's always been a turnover merchant. And I feel like Josh Allen is the type of guy where it's like coaches are going to either win with him because he makes those amazing plays, but they're also going to lose with him because he makes those boneheaded mistakes. And while the Bills, I think, do have big problems on the offensive side and need to get those addressed, I also feel like Josh Allen does also make some mistakes where it's like you could say, you know, how long do you commit to a guy who, yes, great when he's on, but also makes really bad decisions late in games? Going on to Sunday Night Football, Bears at the Niners. I mean, what a game. San Fran. I mean, you gotta give credit to Kyle Shanahan and this coaching staff for what they've been able to do because most teams who, don't have a great offense for the most part outside of McCaffrey and sometimes Purdy and Jennings and Kittle. But like for the most part, the offense isn't really that great. And this defense, well, it wasn't great this well, it wasn't the greatest this game. You got to give credit to this coaching staff for really being able to have the Niners team play in a game in week 17, week 18, where they could have the number one seed and control their destiny to make the Super Bowl. It is just crazy. So you got to give credit to this coaching staff for really being able to have these players play great despite not having the greatest selection of players. For the Bears, I mean, their luck was eventually going to run out. Like, they eventually were not going to be able to come back in the game. They weren't going to just continue to do it over and over again. But I do think this is also a loss, kind of like when the Broncos lost to the Jags or when the Bills beat the Patriots earlier in the year or a couple of weeks ago. I do kind of feel like this is a wake up call where the Bears can say, hey, we need to start playing 4 quarters of great football and not really trying to rely on late game heroics. And maybe that fuels the Bears to make a run late, to the Super Bowl because this is the type of loss where they can say, hey, we almost beat them. If we just get this defense playing better and the offense is more consistent, which I do will get better when Doomsday does come back. I do feel like the Bears, this might be a wake up call to finally unlock this team to not be reliant on late game heroics and instead winning games because this team is great. And finally, Monday Night Football, Rams at the Falcons. I mean, Atlanta, early on, I felt like this was going to be a blowout. You know, I know the Falcons have won a lot of games, and this is a huge upset, but Ricky Morris and this coaching staff still needs to be gone. I even think Terry Montano, the executive branch, need to be moved on from. Because, yes, they beat a really good team in the Rams, but, like, this team, at the end of the year is starting to play well. Like, it's, like, too late. Like Atlanta's talent-wise, one of the top of the league, but this coaching staff, like they just need, like the coaching staff and the executives need to be moved on from. They need to bring in better coaches, better executives, because well, this team, yes, it's a huge win. I also feel like the Falcons maybe need to realize that hey, this team needs to one find a new coach and GM, and also figure out who that long term quarterback is because Michael Penix tearing his ACL again really does affect how his team moves forward. For the Rams, I mean, it was good to see them bounce back after the bad start, but I think this Rams team maybe does have some big concerns because, this defense, well, I mean, it was a huge play by Bijan, but like this defense, I feel like was giving up a lot of big plays. Yes, they had the huge special teams block, return touchdown by Jared Verse, but it felt like the defense wasn't playing the greatest, kind of like the way they blew that lead last week against Seattle. And the offense didn't really come to play. I know, Stafford had another multi-interception game. It kind of feels like the Rams do have some bigger problems that maybe do need to be addressed before the playoffs start because this Rams team a couple of weeks ago, people were saying we're going to be the Super Bowl winners. But a couple of weeks later, I'm not really sure if this Rams team makes it out of the divisional round just because of how concerning this team has looked the past couple of weeks, where the defense has given up huge plays and allowed, you know, opponents to be able to win games. And then the offense, while it has played well at times, has also not been playing the greatest at other times. And I do think it is a concern for a team that is a Super Bowl contender, but maybe doesn't have all the pieces now that we're right before the playoffs. But that'll do it for today's video. Hope you guys have a great day. Hope you guys hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Hope everybody has a great New Year's, and I will see you guys in 2026. But until then, bye.